There's always a silver lining to technology. I find myself pretty frustrated about the doomsayers who believe that the AI revolution will destroy the modern workforce. There will clearly be disruptions, and I don't want to minimize, Sean, the impact of those disruptions to everyday American families. But the Industrial Revolution destroyed millions of jobs. The computer revolution destroyed millions of jobs. Not a single American, regardless of their educational attainment, regardless of their political affiliation, would want to return us to the pre-industrial age.
Welcome to the Additive Advantage podcast, where we go beyond the machines to explore the people, ideas, and decisions driving the future of advanced manufacturing. From emerging technologies to workforce, policy, and production at scale, we bring together the voices shaping what's next.
Today, we're joined by Congressman Dusty Johnson, South Dakota's representative in the U.S. House of Representatives. While we typically spend our time with engineers, entrepreneurs, and manufacturing leaders, today we're taking a step back to explore policy decisions shaping the future of American manufacturing. This conversation covers everything from protecting IP and strengthening the defense industrial base to workforce development, AI, entrepreneurship, and what it'll take for America and South Dakota to remain strong and competitive as it relates to advanced manufacturing. So whether you're building products, leading a manufacturing company, or simply interested in where innovation is headed, this conversation offers a unique perspective from somebody helping shape policies behind America's industrial future at the highest level. Let's get into it. Representative Johnson, great to see you.
Yeah, of course.
So great to have you on the podcast today, Representative Johnson. For those of you who don't know him, South Dakota's U.S. Representative Dusty Johnson is coming to us live from Washington, D.C., here to talk about advanced manufacturing and national security, and of course, the impacts of those things back home here in South Dakota. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I know we're always tight on time. Let me jump right in, Dusty. My first question, and I know this is near and dear to your heart, but as you think about, as a top-level policymaker in D.C., where we are from a national security standpoint today as it relates to, we hear it in the news, hey, we're low on missiles, we're low on bombs. And traditionally, we've had this defense industrial base that was made up of a handful of large companies. How are we doing as a country, and what do you see as the opportunities for us to leverage things like advanced manufacturing as we think about competition with China and other adversaries around the world?
Yeah, we were just talking about so much of that in the Select Committee on China. I'm a member of that. We were talking about that this morning. And first off, I would say, clearly, we're going to be in an environment where there's going to be a strong demand signal from Washington about amping up domestic production of so many of these national security things. And we know that China, they're the world's foremost experts in economic and commercial espionage. That's been our whole hearing this morning on the Select Committee. They are, unfortunately, China, wickedly good at it. And they are positioning themselves to be able to leapfrog America and the rest of the developed world in so much of these advanced manufacturing areas. We do need to do a better job, I think, of protecting our IP. Many American businesses are still asleep at the switch. We clearly have more robust export controls than we have had in a long time. But there are probably some other things that the federal government needs to do, working with the private sector to try to protect that IP. If we don't, we are, in essence, as Vice President Vance says, committing corporate economic suicide by just giving away all of our best stuff to our fiercest economic competitor.
Do you think there's a degree of naivete in America? You talk about many businesses kind of being asleep at the switch. At least for us, that's certainly not a desire to be lax, but I think some people, would you say that we're economically and technologically, in a state of combat most of the time with that adversary in particular?
Yes. With regard to China, we are absolutely in an economic and commercial war. You are right in that most American companies don't fully comprehend it. Many American companies they've had their IP stolen and they don't even realize it. And if we don't, as a country, so much of what we can do to make the next century another American century is really about investing in ourselves, right? And by the way, the Working Families Tax Cut Act did so much of that in that we, again, allowed preferable treatment of R&D. You're not going to have the kind of advanced manufacturing this country needs without preferable tax treatment of R&D, but also expensing of large equipment purchases. That's hugely important to American business. But it's not just about investing in the United States. It is also about making sure that we don't let China reap the benefits of all of our labors for free. And I think particularly on the IT and cyber defense arena, most American companies are not doing anywhere near enough. They probably are falling short of the investments they need to harden their own infrastructure by a factor of 5 or 10.
Well, as a company who's currently in the process of upgrading our CMMC compliance level, I can tell you that it is a large undertaking. It's also of vital importance. Is there a workforce opportunity in all this, Representative Johnson, where, on one hand, you listen to the news and say, oh my gosh, AI is here, jobs are disappearing. On the other hand, we have these significant needs in terms of, national defense investment. You talk about cybersecurity, IT, et cetera. Is there a silver lining to that cloud?
There's always a silver lining to technology. I find myself pretty frustrated about the doomsayers who believe that the AI revolution will destroy the modern workforce. There will clearly be disruptions, and I don't want to minimize, Sean, the impact of those disruptions to everyday American families. But the Industrial Revolution destroyed millions of jobs. The computer revolution destroyed millions of jobs. Not a single American, regardless of their educational attainment, regardless of their political affiliation, would want to return us to the pre-industrial age. We know that quality of life is many-fold higher because of the industrial and computer revolutions, despite the disruption that they cause. And in fact, over the long haul, that disruption is a good thing. It makes sure that our human resources, our capital, our opportunities are better aligned with efficiency, right? We don't have, there are just certain things that computers are better at doing than we are. And you can unlock untold prosperity if you make sure our country, your company, the job opportunities for individuals are aligned with those opportunities. We cannot stop AI. We cannot stop AI. The only question that this country and American companies have is, will we be positioned to reap the benefits of that AI revolution, or will we only be forced to pay the costs of it? And I think I would tell you, our state government, I know there are a lot of non-South Dakotans who are listening to, who love your content here, but I can't speak to their states, but I would tell you, in South Dakota state government, we are woefully behind in how we're integrating technology, particularly AI-based platforms, into doing the work of state government. And I think there are tremendous opportunities there if we have the leadership to seize them.
Totally agree. And what I share with people, even at my very young and tender age of 53, I've seen, the internet right after Al Gore invented it, of course, while I was in college. But people are, oh, I don't know how I feel about the internet. Well, the only way you lost is if you chose not to participate. Same thing with the, personal computer. Oh my gosh, everybody needs a computer. Well, the only way that turned out to be a downside for you is if you chose not to participate and learn how to use one. I have to believe AI is going to be the same way. It will only be the few that try to stick their head in the sand and hope it goes away that ultimately don't benefit, as you described. And, it's a difficult balance, I think, pushing technology and pushing advancement and also maintaining security and protection. Because we're both South Dakotans, I got to give you a South Dakota specific question here. With everything we see happening from a national security, technology innovation standpoint, what do you see as the greatest opportunities for South Dakota to play an ever increasing role there and create opportunities in South Dakota for the next generation of our workforce?
I'm a little concerned right now that culturally, South Dakota and so many other states are growing more populist and more skeptical of technology investments, projects that can move us in the right direction. I mean, it's getting harder and harder in this country to build almost anything. And the same road project that you can get cited, that you're required to cite within 6 months in Germany, we struggle to get done in 6 years in America. And the reality is that if we end up making it almost impossible to build data centers, almost impossible to build new energy generation, almost impossible to build transmission to get that energy to market, we are not going to have a prosperous future. You simply, the history of America is in no small part the history of big ideas, of rural electrification, of universal service, of the Eisenhower interstate system, of the TVA, the Missouri River dams. And I don't know how many of those you could get done today. So you're right, there is tremendous opportunity for South Dakota. But if we're going to seize it, we need a new generation of leaders who, rather than play to, there's tremendous power in no. And it's safe for the politicians to pander to that voice of no. But I'm hopeful we get more Reagan conservatives in our state to step up and talk instead about the power of yes.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. In my big company days, worked for a large publicly traded company. We had a phrase for that. We referred to those people as the corporate boo birds that sat on the highline wire and crapped on every idea that came underneath. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, but there are a lot of folks who've never built anything that seem to be hell bent for leather to keep anyone else from building anything either. And you can't move forward without change. I agree. I share your concerns when I hear people say, we're anti growth, we're anti this, we're anti that. Well, that doesn't create opportunity for anyone.
Well, and
And
I'm a capitalist, Sean, right? I understand, as you do, that in any given year, you're going to have jobs be disrupted. You're going to have businesses. You have whole industries at times disappear because that's what happens in a capitalist system. And that's okay, provided that you're bold enough to have new jobs, new businesses, new industries enter the front door where some are leaving out the back door. But this is not about just growth. This is not about having South Dakota be 5 million people rather than 1 million people. This is about making sure we have vibrant economic opportunities in really rewarding industries like advanced manufacturing, jobs that did not exist 10 and 20 years ago. If the only thing that South Dakota aspires to is having the same jobs available to my kids as were available to me 20 years ago, what a small vision.
well, and it's doomed to fail because inevitably those jobs won't exist.
Right.
To
That's
your
right.
point, if you study history just a little bit and you look at the jobs that existed, 20, 30 years ago, there are a lot fewer and they pay a lot less today. And that's the future that mindset will unfortunately doom our next generation to. I'm curious. I know that you, between the Select Committee on China and focus on some other things around national defense and technology, this whole concept of, advanced manufacturing and things like that tend to be, I hear it on the tip of your tongue fairly regularly, but
Mhm.
help me understand and help our listeners understand what are the conversations like amongst, the group of other top policymakers in DC. Is there a broader understanding of the need to drive innovation, take some risk, and leverage some of these technologies? I mean, what we're seeing even in Iran was a great example. We're shooting a $5 million missile and they're sending back a $100 drone. How well do the policymakers there understand the need for change?
So two levels. First off, particularly in the defense space, you're right. The Pentagon is acutely aware of the importance of mass, and that these fantastically expensive, exquisite systems, billion-dollar platforms, that their survivability will be a real problem in the contested airspace of the future. So they realize that the power of mass, the power of numbers, and I think are doing a better job than we probably are used to giving the Department of Defense or the Department of War credit for with innovative thinking. And indeed, there are South Dakota companies, friends of mine, who are working pretty closely with the department on bringing, munitions for drones and other relatively small platforms to market. And I think from the national defense perspective, we're headed in the right direction. From the broader American economic perspective, I think the policymakers get it at like a conceptual level. And I think we've got tax policy that's pretty well attuned to that. But I don't think we understand how driven China is. And I don't think we understand how big the workforce gap is going to be. People think all these jobs are going to be destroyed by AI. But really, when it comes to advanced manufacturing, to additive manufacturing, there are still a lot of jobs to be created. I don't know that we have the people to fill them. And I don't know that we have a legal immigration system that does a good enough job of making it, I don't want to say easy, but appropriately hard for the world's smartest people to get here. And If we're only relying on native born Americans to design great systems and great manufacturing processes, we're going to lose to China. I don't want to live in a world where China is the dominant economic and innovative force.
I agree, and I share your aversion to that picture of the future. I want to, perhaps we could take encouragement from all the social media reels of World Cup fans traveling to the U.S. and discovering what an amazing place it is, and beyond even ranch dressing, all the amazing things we have to offer here. When you think about, again, I'll go back to workforce, the number of jobs that are needed. And, what I hear in the manufacturing space, I mean, we're millions of headcount short
Mhm.
in terms of the workforce that's needed. We're coming out of a time period where, we decided everybody needed to go to a 4-year school, but I think we have a lot of folks who may have ended up with degrees that don't fit the workforce of the future we need. Is there a conversation at the DC level about how we reposition and realign that workforce on a macro scale?
I mean, I don't want to say that that revolution is done, but we're pretty far down that transition. I think for 10 years, we've been hearing South Dakota governors and American presidents talk about the value of skilled trades. And maybe it was just Mike Rowe 15 years ago, but I think like everybody gets it. You can't find a policymaker that will talk about a 4-year degree as the be all end all. Now, clearly, we need those too, and we need to do a better job of investing in both our 4-year and 2-year colleges and universities in this country. It used to be that all of the very best universities, your top 10 list, your top 20 list, were in England and the United States. That's not true anymore. China has the top spot and an increasingly large number of the top 10 best universities in the world. So we've got some investment to do there. But no, clearly, I think everybody gets it. And I think increasingly where we're spending money, yeah, you just look at South Dakota. I mean, the amount of scholarship dollars that have flowed to our 2-year colleges in the last 10 years are pretty substantially outstripping the kind of new money put into the Regental system, the 4-year system.
If you were a high school student today, which I know at even your age, much less mine, is probably hard to imagine. But if you were a high school student today, what would be appealing to you about these opportunities in the workforce of the future?
Yeah, I've got a 21-year-old at South Dakota State University, an 18-year-old who just graduated and will be headed to the University of South Dakota, and then a 14-year-old. So although you're right, as I'm in my 50th decade on the planet, sometimes the high school days seem a long time ago, but I kind of live vicariously through my sons. And I am pretty bullish, pretty optimistic about the ability of our kids to seek out great opportunities in the technology space. My sons are all very comfortable with technology. It's not like they're going to Dakota State or School of Mines and studying IT, but they understand that almost any field that they study, that IT, that technology is going to be the tool that they'll need to be successful in that industry. And I know not all American students view it that way. And we need to do a better job of investing in technology education for people in all fields. But I see how comfortable my kids are. I mean, these are native technology citizens. And while we need a lot more smart people in this country, that's really the workforce problem we face. I do think I'm pretty optimistic. And if you ask about what fields I would be interested in, as a high school kid, I wouldn't be interested in one field so much as trying to figure out how to be excellent in any field that would have opportunities available to me, because the jobs that are going to exist in 10 years from now are going to be very different than those that exist today.
Agreed. When you think about, and again, I'm coming back to a little bit of a South Dakota lens here, but the opportunities afforded by things like the new B-21 bomber coming to Ellsworth, some of the investment that we're seeing in cybersecurity and drone manufacturing companies on the eastern side of the state, how do we make the most of those opportunities as from a state economy standpoint, and frankly, other technology companies in the state? We're not Silicon Valley, but how do we make the most of the opportunities we have coming our way?
We need a transformation in how our state government views entrepreneurship. I think Rapid City, your town, is doing a much better job than our state generally. But when we get, like, you look at the B21, I mean, there are going to be huge vendors that will be bedded down, maybe some for 3 years, some for 5, some for 10, some for 15. The workers will kind of cycle through there, right? But a certain number of those people are going to fall in love with the Black Hills of South Dakota. A certain number of those people are going to want to start businesses. And right now, I don't think I think we still have we have an antiquated economic development system in how we go about investing in and supporting and encouraging job growth. I'll give you one example, although I could give you 10. I mean, I rolled out during my failed gubernatorial campaign, I rolled out my Launch South Dakota plan, which was going to take millions of dollars away from traditional economic development functions and instead stick them in entrepreneurship, founder-based businesses, startups generally. And we have these proof of concept awards in South Dakota, where state government can give out $25,000 grants so that people can try to move that science experiment in the garage into something that is a little bit better fit for some early stage capital, right? And they work. They work. No, a lot of them fail, right? As you know better than I do, Sean, because you've got more of a history of entrepreneurship than I do. You're going to have a lot of failure when you're in that very, very earliest stage. But if people can't pay for their health insurance, and if they can't buy groceries, they're not able to buy those few months to really accelerate their ideas. We only have $25,000 awards. We're giving out fewer than a dozen of them every year in the state, and tech-based businesses are not eligible. Do you know how insane that is? And so for me, it is about when you've got the smart 32-year-old who decides, actually, I think when I leave this big company, my wife and I, or my husband and I, we want to live here and we want to build a business. We want to make our idea reality here. We need to have an ecosystem that is supportive of that founder mentality. And right now, although Elevate does a pretty good job, they don't have anywhere near as good enough a partner in state government. And if we just have those tools, then the B21 will not be about bombers. It will not be about a platform. It will be about dozens of businesses that spin off from that, even outside of the national security space, and the creation of hundreds or thousands of jobs over time.
I love that vision. And, I'm sitting here in a company that was founded by an ex-B1 pilot who, when, just as you said, he and his wife fell in love with the Black Hills during their time at Ellsworth, thought when we get out of the Air Force, this is where we want to raise our kids. And that was the beginning of B9 Creations, 15 years ago. Having lived a lot of other places over the course of my career, I agree with you. When you look at a military installation, especially you think about an Air Force base that is a bed down location for aircraft, you can look at all those bases and say, well, here's, within 10 miles of the base, there's these 20 or 30 companies that all exist. Let's start some of those in Rapid City rather than just having, somebody who's already doing this in another state open an office here. And, your point about an existing tech-based business not being eligible for some of the tools that we have in our economic development toolbox, my experience both at B9 Creations as well as being involved with Elevate and the School of Mines, helping other entrepreneurs. When you think about the risks to starting a business, there's do you know how to do the business? And then there's will the idea work? Well, if you already know how to do business, a huge amount of the risk is taken out of it. So if you had an existing company that had an idea to expand, launch a new division, whatever the case may be, those are much safer bets. Interestingly, they're bets that traditionally we haven't really been directly enthusiastic about funding, it didn't seem. So I would echo your sentiments there. We have just a couple of minutes left. I'd love to hear from you, your encouragement for the small technology companies in South Dakota and across the nation, especially as it might relate to advanced manufacturing. Based on the seat you sit in DC, what's your advice to all of us?
Well, good business people should almost never take business advice from politicians.
Well, that's probably the best advice you could have given us right there.
Don't listen to us. There is a lot of, I'm going to go in a very different direction than you probably thought I would, Sean, but there's a lot of dysfunction in DC. And honestly, the political marketplace rewards that dysfunction. That's what the political marketplace is asking for, right? And so media outlets, politicians, they respond to incentives in the system. And what we're getting is a government that is so dysfunctional that it actually can stand in the way of job creation in the private sector. So I know a lot of founders, a lot of managers, CEOs, owners kind of think politics is gross and it doesn't have anything to do with them. Politics is a clear and present danger to the economic success of your country. And if you are not at the table, you will be on the menu. And so you have to get politically engaged. You have to demand that elected officials bring a functional, common ground finding approach to bear. If this is only about political celebrity, if this is about hot takes, if this is about owning the libs, we will not be able to have the next century be another American century. And I wish we had more business people who are willing to invest in functional politics.
Well, amen to that. I was having this exact conversation with another CEO recently who said, I try to be apolitical. And the phrase you used just a second ago, Dusty, about, if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. I said, here's what that says to me is when you say you're going to be apolitical, is you're just going to blindly trust these people to do what is good for your company and your employees and your ability to serve your customer. And I said, when you look at their track record of just running the government, it's not good. And we've got to maintain some type of accountability between the folks in DC and the people, and not just the business leaders, but certainly business leaders as an element of their constituents back home that need things to function. So I always appreciate your willingness to shoot straight and tell it like it is. I think we have way more opportunities than we have challenges, as much as it's easy to point out the challenges. And want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come spend a little time with us and talk about, what businesses can be doing and how we can be thinking about growing here in South Dakota. Representative Johnson, thank you so much, and we appreciate your time invested with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's kind of fun to have a totally different guest on here, shake us up a little bit. And I think it's super critical to understand the policies and the overall political environment, in addition to what all these companies are trying to do today. And what was fascinating to me is this framing of manufacturing as a national security capability, not just an economic one. When you think 5 or 10 years from now, what would success look like if America gets it right? And what would that look like day to day for the manufacturers that are listening to this podcast?
I think big picture takeaway from that conversation with Dusty is, we have to understand, not just from a national defense standpoint, what do we have to be able to make, but also from a, food supply standpoint, medicine supply standpoint, all of these other things. And even when you take something like whether it's magnets or batteries, you say, oh, well, we have manufacturers of those. Yeah, we don't have any of the inputs. And when he talks about, the competition, really this competition this isn't new between kind of the East and the West. He talked a lot about China because they are the lead actor when it comes to the East. But, they were very intentional in helping us to ship all that manufacturing capability overseas. I think COVID was a good wake up call, but we've got to get, beyond simply thinking about medical products and things. When you saw, again, I'll go back to COVID, but when you saw, hey, Ford can't make F-150s because they don't have computer chips. You know what else takes computer chips? Fighter jets and a whole lot of other things. So, I think getting it right means, and this is where, this is why we talk to people like Dusty, because, as we're running a business day to day or our customers are running their business, you're probably not mapping the entire supply chain from raw material to end product for multiple industries. And that's really to win in the long run. The capability we've got to have is we don't have to make everything here. There's all kinds of plastic tchotchkes that if they get made somewhere else, probably doesn't matter. There are a whole lot of critical things that if we don't make here and somebody ever decided they wanted to shut the spigot off, or heaven forbid, there's another pandemic, we could have a problem.
Yeah, I want to tease a little bit more into that rise of the East, we'll call it. And you guys spent quite a bit of time talking about, to what extent do American companies realize we're already competing maybe in this economic war with China, or call it of strategic significance when you think about the supply chain. What mindset do you believe that manufacturers need to start to make if they're going to remain globally competitive? To your point, the tchotchkes, maybe not, but there are a lot of critical areas and industries where we would want to remain globally competitive over the next decade.
I think obviously I'm going to assume most companies, and certainly B9, roughly half our revenue comes from outside the United States. So you really have to have a global component to your strategy and think about, are we going to produce where the customers are? Are we going to produce in one location and ship globally? How do we want to handle those things? And rather than just kind of letting it happen, make those choices intentionally and think about, what does this do for your capabilities as a manufacturer? What does this do for, frankly, our national ability to produce the things we need to produce? And again, sometimes you land a big customer somewhere and all of a sudden now, hey, we're doing a bunch of business in whatever country. And it's easy to not take the time to go back and say, how should that shape our supplier strategy, manufacturing strategy, workforce strategy to ensure that you aren't allowing, whether it's IP or other institutional knowledge to walk out the door and you're retaining those critical capabilities.
I think that's great. Another theme I thought was really interesting is this idea that America doesn't have an innovation problem. We have an execution one. If you could remove a barrier that would help manufacturers innovate and then build faster, execute faster, what would it be?
Hmm. Practically, or you mean like magic wand king for a day stuff?
Well, as we know, this is all about the magic wand show.
Well, if it was magic wand stuff, I would remove the barrier between technical people and financial people and magically make that communication happen seamlessly. And if we did that, I have a hunch execution would go up a ton. From a practical standpoint, not that we shouldn't work on that, but I think it would be this essentially the overhead associated with thinking about IP protection on a more global scale. Certainly, if you do any business with the federal government and you're thinking about cybersecurity, or frankly, even if you don't do any business with the federal government, I'm guessing almost anybody who's listening to this probably has a cybersecurity component to their company insurance. That means you have to take certain actions. There's just a certain amount of overhead associated with protecting your business, protecting your customers' information, and, I do see that as a barrier to expanding because your previous question about, globally, how should we think about our manufacturing strategy, et cetera. I can tell you for us, frequently, everything from shipping to IP protection, workforce, like, oh, yeah, we probably should produce more locally. Ugh, a lot of overhead associated with that. Let's just make it here and ship it.
Mm.
And if we could get some of that overhead out of the way and make what I'll call the best decision for the customer, probably some things would get done differently.
I like that you brought up another topic that I want to touch on, which is workforce. And we spend a lot of time about developing workforce. In this conversation and others, there's optimism around AI that it'll create more opportunity than it necessarily eliminates. But I want to talk directly to young people out there. We had a tour come through here of high school students. We had tours come of college students. Speaking to them, what skills would you encourage them to develop so they will be successful in this new manufacturing economy of the future?
Couple of thoughts on that. And then, because this is such a hot topic, we're actually going to do a whole series around workforce, both current state as well as long-term strategy. So keep an eye out for that. I think it's the willingness to dig deeper. And when your instructor or parent or somebody says, have you thought about a career in manufacturing? And now I'm going to struggle to remember them, but what was it? The 4Ds, dirty, dangerous, dark, and something else. Anyway, that's not manufacturing today. And even if you say, well, I don't think I want to be an engineer. And I always tell people this when I'm talking about B9 Creations. I said, so, you have a company full of STEM people, sort of, but, we also have finance and HR and all those other things. I mean, we have an English major that runs part of our finance team and shipping. So there you go. But I think it's when you are 16, 17, 18, even 21, 22, we know so very little about most career fields, unless we had a parent or a family friend who worked in a given career field. We know so little about them when we're trying to make these choices of what to study in college, if we're going to go to college. So do some digging. You are going to spend a lot of years, unless you're, have a rich uncle, you're going to spend a lot of years working. Figure out something that you can do that is interesting to you. And it might be that the field you want to be in, you may be fired up about space, but you might have a marketing degree. I know a lady who fits that description and got a job with a scientific technology related company, even though she had a marketing background, because you know what? Those companies need marketing too. So look for those places to apply your gifts and talents in a context that you find is interesting.
Yeah, that's great. I think this other backbone of manufacturing are entrepreneurs, founder-led companies. I mean, they're hugely, hugely instrumental in this. What role do you see startups and small manufacturers playing in ensuring that the U.S. can remain this leader in innovation and advanced manufacturing?
Well, I'll tackle that in two parts. So one, as it relates to kind of the defense industrial base, which of course is a hot topic in DC as well as in advanced manufacturing today. And then just in general, when you think about in the defense world, the federal government realized traditional defense industrial based companies, and there's a handful of very large ones. There are shortages of key munitions and other technologies that the traditional processes can't move fast enough to address. So they've created other contracting vehicles, other purchasing vehicles to try to work with the non-traditional defense primes and enable those smaller companies, not always smaller, but oftentimes smaller than the handful of typical large defense primes, to move more quickly and address some of these, I'll call them technology gaps based on, the whole world is studying what's going on in Ukraine. How did things unfold in Iran? How did things unfold in the war with Israel? And realizing, when I have to use a $5 million missile to take out a $250 drone, that's bad, because I can't, no matter what country I am, I can't keep that up forever. So I see that angle of it. And then the other side of it is we have to be thinking about, what capabilities does our economy need for the future? And so even if you're not in the defense world, just being cognizant of, okay, to your point, in a previous conversation, we talk about falling in love with a problem and whether that is, what you lived in an apartment and the way that the maintenance staff addressed this issue with what went wrong with your apartment was super frustrating, to, hey, we're running out of ways to have more traffic at surface level. So you're going to go invent a company, named the Boring Company to dig tunnels. And, one of those examples I just mentioned is Elon Musk. Another one of those, a guy that started a company and lives right here in Rapid City, South Dakota. So finding the problems that you can get fired up about, falling in love with that problem, and then finding a way to bring solutions will always be needed. The other element I think that gets overlooked with innovation is large companies, for the most part, innovate through acquisition.
Yes.
Not entirely. Obviously, almost any large company has their own R&D to an extent. But in America, when you look at whether it's med device companies, pharmaceutical companies, electrical infrastructure companies, industry almost does not matter. A lot of the quote unquote new things those companies are doing came from acquiring a smaller company. So the importance of entrepreneurship, starting new businesses, building new companies to address whatever those problems are, isn't just so you can have maybe a company that's successful in 3 states with custom something or other for farmers. That's the company that's going to get bought by some large global agriculture company and take those solutions more broadly to market. So again, I just encouraging people to think beyond the direct innovation impact to, how did Medtronic end up with a whole portfolio of med device? How many of those came through acquisition? Same thing on the pharmaceutical side. If you do a little research, I think you'd be surprised how much of what goes on at a big company started at a small company.
Love that. What a fascinating conversation.
Congressman Johnson, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective on where American manufacturing is and needs to be headed. One thing that really stood out to me through this conversation is that technology alone is not enough. Remaining globally competitive requires innovation and skilled people, supportive policy, and leaders willing to build rather than simply preserve the status quo. Perhaps the most important thing you could learn from that conversation was Dusty Johnson saying, whatever you do, don't take advice from politicians. Until next time, keep building what's next.
And you can follow the Additive Advantage podcast on Apple and Spotify and watch full episodes on YouTube. If this episode was helpful, including Sean's parting gift to you all with that nugget, leave us a 5-star review on Apple or on Spotify. It helps the show grow. Follow us on LinkedIn for new episodes and updates. Thanks for listening.